Hello, art historians, and congratulations, because if you have made it to this point, you have made it to the final lecture of our semester. So we both did it. We made it to this point. This is it. And if I don't see you next semester, it has been a pleasure working with you, and I hope that you have a great holiday break wherever that may take you. All right, so now we are going to finish up the semester by looking at the early Northern Renaissance. So the last lecture we looked at the early Italian Renaissance, which is where the Renaissance or the rebirth of kind of these Greek and Roman ideas began, and we could see that happening in the art. Now, eventually, what's going to start to happen is these ideas are going to start to make their way north of the Alps. They're going to make their way north of Italy and start to get into all of these different states in Northern Europe, right? And the farther away that you would think that the farther they moved away from church power, the less religious in nature it would be, because we still saw a great deal of religious artwork coming out of the early Italian Renaissance. But the fact is, Northern Renaissance art is still going to be extremely religious and very religiously based. But there are going to be some huge differences. And one thing that's going to help to bring these ideas north is going to be the bringing of printing into Europe. Europe actually hadn't had the same access to printing that the rest of Asia had, because China had it and the Arabic world had it, but now Europe is going to catch up. And all of a sudden, with printing, books became much more accessible to not just royalty, but also to the upper class who could afford to purchase books. And again, kind of the same thing, the idea of having this knowledge showed your wealth because you had the access to books and be able to do that. So during this time, Northern Renaissance art they are going to embrace these Greek ideas and Roman ideas of humanism and rationalism. However, they are not going to focus as much on the rebirth of Greek and Roman art and this idea of idealism that we saw in Greece and Rome before. Instead, Northern Renaissance art is still going to be pretty well grounded in Gothic style. And in fact, we're going to start to see that Gothic style permeate all aspects. In fact, domestic architecture will even show the Gothic style. However, that Gothic style is going to blend in with those ideas of humanism and rationalism while still maintaining that religious emphasis. So when we talk about the Northern Renaissance, it's not really a rebirth in the same way that we see it in Italy, because in Italy we can really see the rebirth of Greek and Roman style art and architecture. We can see it in the Pazzi Chapel. We can see it in the Birth of Venus. We can really see that Greek and Roman art really coming back. But Northern Renaissance, they didn't really have all of that around them. They never really did. So they didn't really have all of those Greek and Roman statues like the spear bearer and stuff like that, and, the Pantheon to look at. But they were surrounded by what they viewed as God's beauty and majesty in nature. So Northern Renaissance artists are going to be, and put those ends together, like they're going to be very focused on how things naturally look through natural observation and looking at it. Instead of trying to make it look perfect like the Greeks and Romans did, they're going to try to make it look as natural as possible. And nature's not perfect. It's not. Our human eye is not perfect. We don't see everything perfect. And nature isn't perfect. So that idea of idealism and mathematical perfection, that's not going to be the North. The North is going to be more like, how naturalistic can we make this look? Like almost photorealistic to celebrate this earthly gift that we've been given. So in the North, we are going to have the same kind of situation that we see in Italy, where it's not really going to be royalty that patronizes, not in the sense of like kings and queens, that's going to patronize the Renaissance, but it is going to be very wealthy families who started to make a living as feudalism fell away and people had their own money and wanted to patronize works of art for their own home and their own private worship that represented their status. And one of the families where we're really going to see this happen are the Dukes of Burgundy. And the Dukes of Burgundy up here in Northern Europe were the siblings to the King of France. And in order to kind of compete with what's going on in France and in Paris with the art world, they're going to be huge patrons of the arts in the North to kind of show up their royal brother. So just to show you guys like kind of the area where we're talking about here, the Dukes of Burgundy. So here's France, and then you've got the Dukes of Burgundy over here in the red. In this area we'll kind of know as Flanders, which they considered the Florence of the North. So this piece is not on the 250. They're not going to ask you about it, but I do want to show you how much that Gothic style in Northern Europe is really going to continue on. So for example, this is a domestic home. Like this is not quite a castle, but definitely a very nice residence. And this is the house of Jacques Coeur, and the Coeur meaning heart. And what's kind of cool about it is he embraced that Gothic style he had seen in those churches and brought it into his own domestic home. You can kind of see that Gothic appearance here in the house of Jacques Coeur, and he did have a lot of hearts put here into the bar tracery because the core, like the heart being his symbol. So you can kind of see how that Gothic style is really going to hold on in the north. So please do know this. This is a very important part of this, that Northern Renaissance artists are going to be way more goth than Greek. And by that, their stuff is a lot more somber. It's not as lighthearted or, pretty, glamorous even. It's like you won't see things that look like The Birth of Venus, which was about beauty and physical beauty and all of those things. It's much more moralistic than idealistic. So things are going to be much more, and you can see here, this is just an example, like very naturalistic and not really trying to make it look pretty, just trying to make it look as natural as they possibly can. One thing that's going to be huge in Northern Europe that's going to make this possible is the advent of oil painting. And oil painting is going to change everything in Northern art profoundly, because oil paints can be put on in glazes, like they can be put on in different layers. And what that can do is create much more realistic textures, and it dries a lot slower, right? So that means that it gives them time to kind of fix their mistakes and create much more detail because it's not drying so fast. In Italian works of art, they would use things that were stickier, especially since they needed to stick to like frescoes on the wall. So like egg tempera in Italy is going to be much more popular, or frescoes instead of oil paints. And in oil paints, you can actually make it so that your brush strokes don't appear. So it can really make it look more photorealistic, even though they obviously didn't have any clue about photos yet, and give it more of a three-dimensional, natural appearance, like how it would actually look in nature, like almost like you could touch it. Like the textures in Northern art are incredible. So by putting on all these multiple oil paint glazes, they can create all these different textures to get that naturalism. So Jan van Eyck, which is going to be like, everybody thinks Jan van Eyck invented oil paint. He actually didn't. His brother did. And he wasn't actually the one who made oil paint kind of the standard medium. That's another artist that we're going to talk about. But a really good example of somebody who was a master of using oil paints is going to be Jan van Eyck in Bruges. So he was actually the court painter to one of the Dukes of Burgundy, who was related to the French king. He was incredible at using oils to create different textures, different lights. You can see here the turban that he's wearing is kind of like a trademark of his. That red turban was something you could always use to identify him. And you can see the different materials that are in it and the different folds that were in it, and even the stubble like this. So you could even tell when a man had shaved by looking at a Van Eyck painting, because it was so realistic, and you could see like the amount of scruff that he had on his face. Now, this piece is not on the 250 either, although I have no idea why, but this is the Ghent Altarpiece, which is one of Van Eyck's best known works of art, and it was actually done by Jan and his brother. And during this time, altarpieces became a very big deal in Europe because they had all these Gothic churches, so the commissioning of altar pieces, even for these churches or for private homes, became very popular at the time. And this is a polyptych, which means there's 12 different panels in this. And if you've ever seen the Monuments Men, the movie, like one of the pieces they're really trying to get is the Ghent altarpiece back. And it's one of the main pieces they find at the end. So it would be opened at different levels on different religious holidays. But this is actually the closed version of it in the outside. And you can see that the realistic, naturalistic detail of the shadowing and the statues in it, which is a technique called grisaille, which means you use like gray paint to make it appear like it's actually a statue. Like this looks like you could reach in and actually grab the statues and touch it. And like the textures and everything were so realistic. So this is a little bit of a zoomed in picture of it. And you can see, now if you look at this, the perspective is not good. They were not using that linear perspective that Italy used at all. They were not trying to create a mathematically perfect. They were trying to create naturally perfect, like in the details and how realistic they could make it look, and the folds of the clothing and how natural this looked, like stone, like it naturally looks that way. But they're not really good at perspective or depth because they weren't trying to be. That wasn't what was as important to the North. So, for example, take a look at this at the very bottom. You can see that instead of creating linear perspective where you have different lines that go to a vanishing point on a horizon line, they don't really do that. They kind of take the scene and tilt it up. So almost like they took a table and tilted it up so you could see everything that was on the back to the front of the table. They don't really worry about that mathematical linear perspective. But they even said that on here, the natural detail is so amazing that you can see the types of trees that they had by the fruit that were going on it and the leaves and the type of grass that they had, because it's just that natural in detail. Another thing that's very characteristic of Northern Renaissance art is symbolism. They love to use symbolism because this was a way of using physical material objects to express a heavenly idea. They're literally bringing heavenly ideas down to earth in the form of physical symbolism and using objects to represent that. And we've already kind of seen this before in Hiberno-Saxon art. For example, whenever we saw on the Lindisfarne Gospels and or the Book of Kells, and there's cats with mice on it, and the mice are eating the communion wafers because the mice are actually evil and the cats were trying to stop them. So, for example, in a lot of Northern Renaissance art, if you see a mouse trap, that would be considering to like a way to ward off the devil because the mouse was the devil. So if you look at this painting by Jan van Eyck, it is totally full of symbolism as a way to take a material object that they could make look so naturally realistic and give it a heavenly spiritual meaning. So this is the Arnolfini Wedding. It's also known as the Arnolfini Portrait because it's debatable on whether it's a scene that is the subject or it's the people that's the subject. And yes, the guy looks like Vladimir Putin. We get that. People make fun of that all the time. But you can see here that the natural detail that he uses in using that oil paint, you can see that you can tell the fabrics that they're wearing. And you can see that she has furs on and white cotton, and he has furs. You can even see the different levels of fur on the dog, like the undercoat is coming out of it, because through observation of what they saw, they painted what they saw, and they painted with oils incredible naturalistic detail. So there are so many symbols on this, and this is zoomed in. I'll go back here to the back wall, and you can see if you look through them, you can see that mirror, and there's the back wall, and this is a zoomed in version of it, and you can see that there's stains on the wall. You have a broom, which is a symbol of domestic, responsibility, and here he signed it. Jan van Eyck was here and the year that he signed it. But what's most incredible is this mirror, which on these small, tiny pieces, which you can barely see, it has the scenes from the life of Jesus all the way around it, because this is a very religious area and this is a holy scene. You've got Catholic rosary beads there on the left with different colors in them, and the beads even have reflections in them. But if you look in the mirror, which almost is like a concave or convex mirror because it has a little bit of that bend to it, if you look, you can see a man in a red turban, and Jan van Eyck painted himself into this painting as kind of a witness to this scene, because you can see the back of the subjects here in it. So there are many different symbolic meanings that are put into this, so much symbolism that was in this painting. So there's all different kinds of speculation as to what this painting actually is. There's all different kinds of interpretations. It could possibly be a wedding portrait of Giovanni Arnolfini and Giovanna Sinami, but the problem is they got married 13 years after this painting was done, so that may not actually work. So therefore, people think it may actually be a betrothal. So if you paint the picture, it kind of like, it's permanent. So it kind of seals the deal, no pun intended. Like, okay, you're going to get married, so now we can get that dowry, which is the gift from Giovanna's parents to Giovanni to kind of say like, yes, this is going to take place because we basically had her painted in to the picture. So in terms of symbolism, you've got the prayer beads that we talked about on the back wall. Now she looks, if you look here, she looks to appear to be pregnant. But she's actually not, because they weren't married yet. So it probably is actually a symbol of a fruitful marriage that she eventually will be. So it's the hope that there will be children in this marriage, or kind of a promise of what comes from marriage. And then at the bottom, you see this dog, and the detail in the dog, and even in the different fur that he has, like the undercoat and the overcoat. And a dog would be loyalty. Look, you can see above the dog the details in the rug. Like, that is absolutely incredible how accurate that is. So just to go back here. So the shoes, the fact that they're barefoot, that would mean that this is a holy ground, or it's a like a very sanctuary, like not sanctuary, sanctimonious scene. Like, so this would be on the grounds of humility. The oranges, Giovanni sold fruit, so this may be a sign of the wealth and where this comes from, but could also be the possible fruit that will come from their marriage. And the groom is actually praying, which means he may be making a vow to her of his promise of fidelity. Now, if you look here, on the bed is carved in detail Saint Margaret, and that's the patron saint of a healthy childbirth. So hopefully there will be healthy children. There is a single candle, which is a light of God and devotion. And then the bed is done in red, which would be because the hope of the childbirth bed, kind of that, symbolism of that. I mean, this is just incredible. And then the broom being the symbol of the housewives at the time. So taking material objects in a very natural way, like how much detail is in it, and then making that have such a deeper meaning to people. So this is the next piece that we're going to look at. And looking at this, you could probably realize right away that if this is northern, you can tell it's northern because the linear perspective is not there. Like, there's no vanishing point that everything points to. Like, the perspectives kind of jump all over the place. Like, from over here, you're looking at the fireplace. From over here, you're looking at the tea kettle. There's people looking in from different ends, and the scene tilts up. Like, it's almost like you're standing down and looking upwards to be able to see everything that's in it. So instead of giving it depth, they just kind of tilted it up. But there is so much symbolism in this, and you can tell it's that Renaissance technique of taking a ancient event, this is a biblical event that's taking place, and putting it in a scene in modern Flanders, because that's modern Flanders outside, because this is Mary, who is about to be told she's very humble and unaware, like unsuspecting, which is one of the greatest virtues about her, that here comes the angel to tell her she is about to conceive the baby Jesus and from the Holy Spirit. And then Joseph is outside in another room working in his workshop. And there's all kinds of symbolism here. But who are these two people outside? That's a little bit different. So this is called the Merode Altarpiece, and it's also known as the Annunciation Altarpiece, because Mary is receiving the announcement from the angel Gabriel that she is going to be conceiving the baby Jesus. So all of this was set in modern Flanders, all right? So that's definitely not how it was, but it's a very biblical scene that's taking place, so that way it would really be connectable to the people who are looking at it. Now, this piece was made for a private patron who was very wealthy, who is actually shown kind of stumbling into this scene. Like, they're arriving home, and in their home, this is happening. So kind of a reminder of, this could be us. Like, this, we are not that different from them. And it could very well be taking place in our home, in our town, to kind of connect with that even more closely. And again, the perspective is not there. That linear perspective we saw in Italy, definitely not there. There's a whole lot of symbolism in this to kind of bring the spiritual world down to earth, making it accessible for everybody. So one, we see a mousetrap on Joseph's table. So let's kind of move back here. And again, a mousetrap that he's making with carpenter tools, kind of giving the reference to Jesus being a carpenter, is that this is going to trap the devil. Like, the cross was called the mousetrap of the devil, because it basically trapped him, and the mousetrap is kind of the same thing. Why is Joseph using those tools? Because Jesus was a carpenter, so it's kind of a reference to that. Why is Mary blocking the fireplace? Because through her sacrifice, she basically saves everybody else from hell, so that's kind of part of that. Lilies in the vase are innocence, and that is Mary's innocence, that she is not part of this. Like, she is the innocence that, she's innocent. She has never known a man, so therefore it's the Immaculate Conception. Why does the flower have 3 buds on it? It could be Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, so kind of the representation of the Trinity. Smoke coming from the candle. There's all kinds of debates on that one, so I won't really go into it. The water vessel hanging on the back wall, which looks like it's in a little Gothic niche, would be the reference of water and baptism, and the fact that Jesus will be baptized. Why is there a towel in front of her book and the water jug? So that could possibly be like the swaddling clothes that she's going to place her baby in. And also on the table, you'll notice that there's not only a book, but there is a scroll. And so one is old and then one is new with this new advent of printing. So the old could be the Old Testament scroll, and the new with the book open could be the New Testament telling the story of Jesus. And the New Testament begins with his birth. And if you notice, there's this little figure coming in through the window with a cross, which is basically like the moment of conception, like bringing the baby in, like this is that very sacred moment. You can see the detail and like the wood shavings and the grain on the table, but notice it's almost like it's tilted upwards. Like they weren't really worried about creating depth. They just kind of took the scene and tilted it so you could see everything going on at once. So the people standing outside, and I like to remember this because the artist is Robert Campen and the patrons are camping out outside. So they had just come in from outside, from the city walls, and they're coming in and he's taking his hat off because he's like witnessing this incredible scene going on in his home. And this piece of art was probably used for their private devotion within their home. And at the time, he may not have been married yet, but there was the hope of marriage and children. So if you notice, she's kind of crammed into the corner of this because she was probably added later on after the work was created. And this could be the hope for them of their own children. So just like Mary is receiving this word, like this visit from the angel Gabriel, maybe they will soon be receiving that as well. So just to show you guys, like, you can't see all this detail, but it's there. It's just absolutely incredible, the naturalistic detail they put into it. So please realize this when we talk about realism, all right? So realism in the North was not about making things look perfect. It was realistically perfect. So the detail and the naturalism was perfect in terms of this is how it actually looks. Nature isn't perfect. Our eye isn't perfect. But in Italy, realism was mathematically driven. It was linear perspective and geometric shapes and trying to make things look perfectly realistic in their own way. So it's kind of a little bit of a reverse in what their emphasis was. All right, so this is just a handy dandy chart for you in comparing these two things. We are now finished with the entire semester. So I wish you good luck as you prepare for your finals and in your holiday break. I hope you have an amazing time.